So welcome to Motivations for Sustainability. It's me again, Professor Rob Fleming, and the course is Principles of Sustainable Design. In terms of our schedule, last week we covered the context for sustainability. That was great. I hope you enjoyed it. Next week we're going to be looking at frameworks for sustainability, and I promise you we will get closer and closer to the things that you're probably most excited about. Green buildings, high performance buildings, ecological landscapes, all the kind of things that you normally associate with green design or sustainable design. However, there is foundations that we have to consider. There are fundamental motivations that we need to consider. And so this first lecture is going to be looking at, for example, what drives us to build a green building or what drives us not to. So starting off with a few actual quotes from actual people might help us. So for example, I hear this all the time: green buildings cost too much. Now, if I understand the motivations of the person who said that, I might be wondering, what are they thinking? Cost too much for what? Don't you care about the future of the planet? Really? And yet they do cost too much, or at least they cost more than the average building. So there must be some rationale or motivation for why we would want to do this. This lecture is going to be getting into that. How much more will a green building cost? This one, of course, is the death of a project. When you get a client like this, you automatically know that you're in huge trouble, because the underlying motivation underneath that comment is, I'm not going to spend anything extra because I don't value sustainability, I don't value green, and I really don't value the future from a long-term sense. Harsh, right? How about, I like to do a green building, but we can't afford it? That sounds like there's some hope and promise there, because here's somebody whose motivations or what drives them is they want to do it, but they don't know how to do it. That's something that I can work with as a sustainable designer. Ultimately, it's all about the money. No, it's not all about the money. If we look at an old world view, we might begin to think it's all about the money. But I think it's about so much more. And I think sustainability is about the money and must be about the money, but it can be about so much more. Green buildings are expensive and a pain, but it's the right thing to do. And this has been my experience in 20 years of sustainable design. Is the group starts off with one set of motivations where they're like, oh, this is such a pain, I don't want to do it. And the end with, wow, that was really great. You know what? This was the right thing to do. And we all hold our heads proudly and move forward to the next project where it gets cheaper and easier. So the thesis for this presentation then revolves around two major competing or often competing forces: the desire for profit, which we're going to use the term invisible hand, and the desire to do good, or the idea of empathy, which I'm going to use the term second invisible hand. Ultimately, though, sustainability could be the great banner under which these two often contradictory forces are resolved. Imagine an idea or a worldview where we can both make our profit and also make our planet better. What a great idea. This lecture and this week's lecture is going to get into how we're going to do that. It's going to lay the foundations for that. So let's look a little bit deeper at the underlying motivations. There are two major ones that we're going to be looking at today. There are more. We'll be covering those later in the frameworks of sustainability. So the big two are maximization of profit. Everybody wants to maximize profit, and I imagine there's nothing fundamentally evil about that. But also there's a side of us, or something inside of us, that wants to maximize goodness. We do want to do the right thing. We don't always do it, but we certainly would like to say, I'm a good person. Right now, these two, in the business world at least, under capitalist models, and even really any kind of economic model, are held in opposition. And that's what we want to change. That's what the idea of sustainability can begin to attack this. So let's take a closer look. So elements associated with maximization of profit can lead directly to, for example, survival, right? We're all trying to earn a living so we can go out and feed our families and have a decent quality of life, or we can begin to minimize pain and maximize comfort. So it's not enough for us as humans just to have enough to eat or to have enough water to drink, although it's necessary. Many of us are out there trying to get as much money or as much profit as we can to maximize comfort. I think this is a fundamental human attribute that all animals share, and I don't think there's anything fundamentally evil about it. We see excess, which we'll talk about soon, but in any case, it's natural to have this sense of self-interest, and it certainly forces us to think in the short term. If I'm hungry when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to be thinking only of food. And next week, we're going to get into Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where we can begin to talk about that some more. Now, there's also this idea of maximization of goodness, which includes concern for the other's well-being and also for the planet's well-being. Some people think this is really corny, that it's really a dog-eat-dog world, and we're going to go out there and we're going to be the fittest, which has been misinterpreted, or we're going to be the strongest and only the strongest survive, and forget the future of the planet and forget those around us. We're just going to get what we want. I think, though, that we're hardwired to also think indirectly over the long term, because if we take care of the planet now, which is hard to understand, we know that we'll be assuring a better future for ourselves and our children. It's a much more complex idea and it's a much more distant idea. And sustainability then is trying to get us to think about both of these ideas simultaneously. So many people call this enlightened self-interest, that if we do good for the planet, if we do good for ourselves, we can do good for the community simultaneously. I think that this is an unfortunate term in the fact that it's been abused throughout history. So we'll come back to that, so don't worry, I'm not just going to leave that hanging there. But let's take a look at the situation that we're in now. We've got a situation where we have a beautiful planet Earth with a set of declining resources. And there's a vector there that represents where we're headed. And we also have an increasing demand for those same resources. So what begins to happen when they intersect? We begin to reach something called unsustainability. And this is what we worry about when we go to sleep at night. Oh my God, the planet won't be here. We're all going to die. Well, we're certainly looking at the idea that some of our energy reserves may run out in the future. We really don't actually know when, because we don't really know how many reserves we have, but we worry about that. We worry about severe climate change, and many people in the world are affected quite directly. If you live in Australia, for example, you're really feeling the effects of that. Ultimately, we worry about ecosystem collapse, not because we worry about the planet or Earth or nature. We're worried about the ability for nature to support us and our quality of life. Ultimately, we are looking at a lower quality of life for some or many, and we're even looking at a loss of life for some or many if we can't begin to change the path that we're following right now. So let's talk a little bit about externalities, commons, and reserves. So, this course has got a little bit of theory in it, and it has it because we need to understand some of the basic terms and concepts that underlie what I would say is unsustainability. So we're going to get into that a little bit in the next few lectures, in this lecture. So we can also begin to think about jumping over the razor's edge, to begin to think about another way to think about design, to think about how we interact with the planet. Imagine designing a building that actually exports more energy than it needs on a daily basis. That's a regenerative process that replenishes resources. Or imagine a building that cleans the water. Or imagine a building that actually reuses its materials over time so that it regenerates. Also imagine a building that's super efficient, that decreases the demand for those kinds of natural resources that we hold so valuable. So sustainable design really is quite simple. It's actually about turning these curves around to increase the amount of resources on the planet and decrease demand. It's actually really not that complex, but because our motivations are so varied, it actually is very hard to do. So that's really the end of the introduction. Stick around and get involved in the next set of lectures, and we're going to be looking at the invisible hand next.